G'day folks. In this video I'm going to test if you can zone focus a Fujifilm APS-C censored camera using the depth of field scale on a manual focus lens like the Leica M Mount Voigtlander Ultron. This is the 28mm f2.0, which is a full frame lens, and I wanted to see if it worked, if the actual depth of field scale works with APS-C size cameras just as well without the need to recalculate or do any adjustments, because in the field when you're shooting like things like street photography, you don't have time to recalculate. You just want to take the photo and capture that moment. Well, firstly, let's talk about zone focusing and its benefits in street photography. Zone focusing is using lenses depth of field scale to achieve acceptable focus. Most manual lenses have a depth of field scale depending on the f-stop you choose, say f8, which is popular in street photography. You can see on the lens that there are two sets of stop numbers, and the distance between them is where most things in the frame are acceptable focus, if you don't pixel peep, that is. And what I was wondering is if I can use my full frame vintage manual lenses, can I use them on APS-C size sensors? Because I use Fujifilm APS-C cameras and I have adapters for them for street photography, and rely on the depth of field scale without having to recalculate, say, 1.5 times the focal length. And so I went on Google and I searched for answers, but found that everyone has different views and that they were varied. I couldn't get a clear yes or no. I mean, if I needed to recalculate the depth of field, it'd be pointless for fast-paced like street photography. So I've decided to do an experiment myself without the maths and just focus on the camera's ability to use focus peaking and magnification functions, which you can set in the menu. So let's go ahead and see what I come up with. So we'll start this experiment with the picture, which is going to be our subject, and it's going to be about 2.5 meters from our camera, which is set up on a tripod. So we're running the test on this Fujifilm X-T5 APS-C sized camera, and we're using a Voigtlander Color Skopar 35mm 2.5 lens, which is a manual focus lens, and you've got the manual focus scale on the top with the depth of field indicators. Firstly, we'll start by putting the aperture into f8, because that's the most popular aperture for street photography. You'll get the most depth of field. And then, so based on that, if we have a look, and since our picture's about 2.5 meters, we'll use a scale of about 1.6, as you can see, to about 5 meters, and everything in that range should be in focus. And we'll test it out. We'll move it first to around the 1.6 mark, and then we'll have a look at our LCD. So that shows, you can see all the red focus peaking. Oh, just to let you know, prior to that, I've set up focus peaking for manual focus, which you can do in the menus, and you could set it to any color you want. I think that you can choose yellow, white, red, or blue, depending on what you prefer. I prefer red myself. So that shows you what is in focus in the frame, and it gives you a guide. So as you can see, at that range at about 1.6, everything's in focus. Now we'll move to the higher range, which was 5 meters, and then we'll have a look at the LCD panel. As you can see, our picture is still in focus. We've got the red. It's not as strong as it was at the lower setting, but it's still quite acceptable. We'll take a photo there. We'll actually move it back to the 1.6, and we'll take a photo there as well, just to compare. We'll repeat the experiment with an aperture setting of f4. Set that to f4. As you can see from the scale, it's a much narrower depth of field. So we'll still choose 5 meters. So anything from about 2.5 meters, as you can see, to 5 meters will be in focus. So we'll start with about 2.5 meters and have a look at our LCD. And yep, there you go. It's all, you can see that the picture's lit up red. You've got the pixels on the peaking, so that's in focus. And then we'll move it to the highest point, which is about a 5, back to the LCD. And it's not as strong, but you've still got sort of red outline on the focus peaking on the picture. So that's in focus as well. So that's within acceptable focus range. We'll take a picture there. So for part 2 of the experiment, I've changed it to a 28mm Voigtlander Ultron 2.0, and it's also a manual focus lens, M series, Leica M series, and it has a depth of field scale We'll start by putting the aperture setting to f8, and we'll move so we want about 5 meters, so we'll move, as you can see, the depth of field scale, and you can see that everything from about 1.2 to about 5 should be in focus. So if we have a look at our LCD panel, you can see that that's lit up red, so the focus peaking indicates that our picture is in focus. Now we'll move to the upper range, which is about 5 meters. Look at our LCD, and that's quite good as well. You can see it's not as strong, but focus peaking indicates that our picture is still in focus. We'll just take a photo there. Now we'll adjust our aperture to around f4, and then having a look at our depth of field scale at f4, it's a much narrower depth of field, so only from about 1.9 or so to 5 is in focus. So we'll go to the lowest range, which is about 1.9 or so. Look at our LCD, and that looks like our picture is in focus, peaking red. Take a photo, and then we'll go to the upper range, which is around 5 meter mark. Have a look at our LCD. It's still lit up red, not as strong, but it's still in focus. Take a picture there. For the last test, we're going to test the X-T5 Fujifilm with the Helios 44 M4, which is a 58mm lens, but on APS-C size sensors, it'd be equivalent of about 90mm. So because of its focal length, your depth of field is going to be very narrow. So we'll do the test a bit differently on this one, using the focus peaking setting to test the focus scale. This is a manual focus lens as well, and it's quite a vintage lens from Russia, I believe. This lens gives some beautiful bokeh. The way we'll test this one is we'll test it in f8. We won't test the lower ranges because the depth of field is way too narrow. It's not the best street photography lens. It's just too telephoto, but this is only for experiment purposes. So we've got our picture still there, 2.5 meters. Set the camera at f8, and what we're going to do is we're going to use our focus peaking settings instead. Sort of see where it's in focus at the lower range, which is about there, and that would show you about a setting of 1.7 for the focus on the higher range. And if we have a look at the scale at f8, and then if we move on to the higher range, it starts to fade out around here. So I'd say about 3 meters. 1.7 to 3 would be the range of this lens. So if we look at the depth of field scale, and we go to if you look at between f8, you get 1.7 and around 3. So it's about the same as what our experiment showed. So you can use this depth of field scale on the APS-C size sensor to get, it wouldn't be a fully accurate reading. I mean, there's room for error, and it's not your typical lens that you'd be using for street photography, but it can be useful to use the scale if you want to take quick pictures and you don't have time to pull out your focus peaking and test it, because in a high pressure environment, you need to get the shot, and that's more important. So based on the tests I've carried out, I'd be comfortable to rely on the depth of field scale on the manual focus full frame lenses when used with APS-C bodies like the Fujifilm X series cameras for street photography. Probably not for wildlife, landscapes, portraiture, fine art, or when you require critical focus, or if you're a pixel peeper. I think it only gives you a rough guide to the focus, and it would be more like an acceptable focus rather than absolute focus. So for those fields, I would still rely on my autofocus or focus peaking settings in manual mode. Let me know in the comments what your experience is with using full frame manual focus lenses on your Fujifilm X series cameras, and whether you find that the depth of field scale is enough to get acceptable focus, or whether you found that they don't work for you. Either or, I'd love to know in the comments. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to my channel for more upcoming photography videos. I have a review on the Fujifilm X100 VI that you may enjoy in the links above. Thanks for watching.